it's circulating the air in the room and you're pulling out some of that moist air if it's too moist, like I said, then it's dry enough. Now, whether you've trimmed it or not, now you would be trimming it, and then you can take the individual buds off of these dried branches, put them into jars, glass jars, and seal the jars. And you'll see, even though when you put those buds into those jars, they felt like they were dry on the outside, that moisture from the inside of the buds, once they're inside the sealed jar, works its way out, because the moisture wants to come to an even level inside the jar. So you open up the jar 2 or 3 hours after you've sealed it, and those buds feel moist again. That's that inner moisture sweating outwardly out of that bud, and that's the curing process. It's slowing the drying to a crawl, and that really takes away that chlorophyll-y green sort of taste, and that hay-like odor and all those things. Those are now, because of that sealed air, that's working its way out slowly, and that's curing. And this is literally what 99% of commercial growers certainly don't do, and a lot of other growers mess this process up, and it's could be considered the most important process in order to get a perfect finished product, is curing. And after a few weeks of burping those jars, we call it burping them, opening them, depending, sometimes once a day. Early on it might be 2 or 3 times a day. You open them, let that moist air out of the jar, and then seal it back up. Now the dry air that's gone back into the jar will even itself out, and slowly but surely you're pulling that moisture out, and that's curing. So then, like I said, after 2 weeks or so of burping those jars, you should be able to grind it up and smoke it, and it'll burn cleanly and not have that harsh kind of chlorophyll-y taste to it. And then you can go much longer. Obviously, you can cure for months and months and even a year or more by just keeping them in those sealed jars.
Go ahead.
I don't think that's a good way to go. And I'll tell you why.
There's lots of different ways to
I'll tell you why. You put them in the jars and you have all that moisture, you have bacteria. You'll never pass a test. You'll never pass a bacterial test. That's a breeding ground for bacteria. That is not the way to go. Because here's the thing. As that moisture leaves those buds, where does it go? It goes into the air in the jar, right? You're getting 70, 80% humidity in those jars. You cannot have that. That is terrible, and also it destroys the terpenes. So when after all that burping, burp, 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 what do? You have 1,000 pounds. Burp, 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 burp. It's crazy. It's a myth. Right. It is ludicrous. Here's what. You don't want your humidity to go over 65%. So you want to have your space with a humidifier and a dehumidifier, keeping it at 65%. First, when you're drying, you go to 50%. Then you might go up a little. And the major thing that nobody's talked about is what the percentage should be in the bud at the end, percentage of water, 12%. So you've probably read that on the internet in different sites. Oh, it should be 12%. Nobody tells you how to do 12%. How do you determine it? You've read it. You've read it on the internet. Yeah, no, I'll tell you how to determine it. Use a softwood moisture meter. And you just it's a laser beam, and you get your percentage.
I've never seen that. That's
right. That's
learn something every day here.
So your method of drying, you just extend the drying process and let the plants dry longer.
Yeah.
Without.
Keep it in the same space and just change the humidity a little bit. Raise the humidity from the drying humidity.
It's a sort of form of air curing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The thing I love about what he said is terpene preservation. Because, if you're drying your bud and you smell it, then those terps aren't on your bud anymore. They're in the air, So it's a really good idea.
65 to 70 degrees.
65 to 70 degrees. One of the things is going back to the trimming. You have a couple options when it's time to trim, and you can dry trim it, like by hang it up like Danny described, letting it get crisp and then going through and manicuring it, or you can actually trim it when it's wet, right after the harvest. Different growers have different ideas on this, and it really has to do with different factors. Your labor force, for one. If you're pulling down 30 pounds of cannabis, right, and you harvest it all at the same time and it's hanging up, you better have 30 trimmers that are ready to manicure that stuff and get it ready before it hits the point where he was warning about it, to where it gets so dry that it starts to lose its terpenes, right? So you have to know that you can get it handled in a proper way if you're going to dry trim it. Because once it's there and it's dry, you've got so much time to get it all done. With wet trimming it, you can take it off the plant, trim it accordingly, hang it up, and let it go. But the problem with that is it has an effect on the aesthetic. In Oregon, the dispensaries will pay $200 to $300 more for hand trim bud. But at the same time, you're going to pay your labor $100 to $150 per pound to try, so it's really a call, and it's what your customers want, it's what your patients want, And then you've got for the large, like outdoor and large scale grows, you have these automatic trimmers that go through, and that's a completely different story. I mean, that's more of a commercial type, that's going to have the least aesthetic of all the different ones. But the best looking is going to be a hung, dried plant that you come through and meticulously hand manicure afterwards. But like I said, if you've got 30 pounds of that sitting there, there's no way you're going to get through it by the time that 30th pound is even still viable or desirable for the marketplace. So you have to just make sure you know what your load is. You have to have your proper labor, and just take all those things into consideration when you decide how exactly you're going to ultimately harvest your plants. And then that's going to help you keep retain the best quality. Basically.
One last thing I'll say about hand trimming is when you're hand trimming and you're cutting the sugar leaf and the fan leaves, get in there and get the base of the fan leaves out. It's a pet peeve of mine, but when I see those little sticks, coming out, there's no reason for that in there. The crow's feet kind of idea where you just cut the leaf off and left the stem. If it's a big fan leaf, get in there and get the stem out and leave just the flower. That's either lazy trimming or that's machine trimming, but that's a sign of poorly trimmed cannabis.
All right, guys. Well, we have only about 6 minutes or so left. I want to open it up to questions. I'm sure some of you guys have some questions. Raise your hand, and we'll get to you. You gentlemen down here first. Or just shout it out. I didn't. Sorry, I didn't see the mic.
Okay. Hi, my name is David Kane. I'm from here, but I recently got into the industry in California, up in Humboldt. So no, I couldn't agree anymore. Like, yes, the curing is like probably the most crucial part in the stages. And I know I've seen it all. Like, I've seen farms lose like at least 100 pounds or more just by mold. So like, could you do you guys have any like certain techniques that you guys use for like mold prevention?
Really just really open up the airflow on the plant. People are so afraid to cut stuff off the plant because they think they're going to lose it in the yield. But a lot of this stuff that's anywhere below, like this much from the top of the plant is only stealing energy away from the buds that are on the top. All the fan leaves that aren't getting direct sunlight exposure, all the buds that are down there that aren't getting exposure, all they're doing is hindering the airflow that runs through there. Airflow is the number one thing that will prevent the mold, because it's in the morning, overnight, the dew sets on the plants and on the buds, and then there's no light that hits them at dawn, so it's like 3 or 4 hours of it literally just sponging and collecting up that water. With the bacteria that he mentioned, or fungus or whatever, now all of a sudden you've got mold on your plants. And that is the number one thing you can do, is just over prune. And to keep a nice airflow running through the plants. That'll, outdoor in this climate, you'll still get 10% of a loss, but 10% is way better than 50% or whatever. And you won't, the biggest thing to understand is if you cut a small bud off the bottom of the plant, it will reappear back at the top in mass on one of the bigger plants. It's just the way it's always been.